There are places in this world that are supposed to be safe, places that carry the smell of home-cooked meals and the sound of laughter, places where you take off your shoes at the door and exhale because you believe with everything inside you that nothing bad can reach you there. For Liliana Bowen, her aunt's house in Georgia was that place. She had been looking forward to the visit for weeks. She packed her bags, drove 5 hours south, and walked through that front door with a wide smile on her face, excited, trusting, and completely at peace. But by the time those same 5 days were over, Liliana would drive back home a completely different person. Because inside that house, inside what was supposed to be the safety of family, something happened to her that she never saw coming. Something that came from someone she never would have suspected. And the worst part? No one believed her at first, not even the people who claimed to love her most.
Before we continue, I want to know where you're watching from right now. Drop your country in the comments below. We have viewers joining from all over the world, and it means everything to know you're here. And if you care about stories that bring real awareness to the kind of abuse that hides behind closed doors and family smiles, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because these stories is more common than most people think, and the more we talk about it, the harder it becomes for it to stay hidden.
On the surface, everything looked exactly as it always had. The living room was loud and warm. Her Aunt Sandra's cooking filled every corner of the house with the kind of smell that wraps around you like a blanket. Her cousins were running in and out of rooms, the TV was on, someone was always laughing about something. It looked like a normal family gathering, because it was supposed to be one. But behind that perfectly familiar picture, something was wrong. And the scary thing about wrong is that it rarely announces itself. It doesn't walk in through the front door. It doesn't make a sound. It moves quietly, the way a shadow stretches when the sun starts to go down. And by the time Liliana felt it, really felt it, she was already too deep inside the house, too far from her car, and completely surrounded by people she had trusted her whole life. That is what makes this story so hard to tell and so important to hear.
Liliana Bowen was 23 years old, and if you had met her at the time, you would have liked her immediately. She was the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday, who sent voice notes instead of texts because she thought they felt more personal. She worked a part-time job at a dental office in Charlotte, North Carolina, and she was saving up to go back to school to study healthcare administration. She was responsible. She was quiet in the way that people who think deeply are quiet. And she was, by every account of the people who knew her, a genuinely good person who tried to see the best in everyone around her.
Family meant everything to Liliana. She had grown up visiting her Aunt Sandra's home in Savannah, Georgia every few years, and those visits had always felt like celebrations. Sandra was her mother's older sister. Warm, loud in the best way, the kind of woman who made you feel like you were the most important person in the room the moment you walked in. And Aunt Sandra's household was full. Her husband, 3 adult children, and various cousins and extended family members were always rotating in and out of the house. It was busy, it was noisy, it felt alive. Among the people in that household was a man named Kelvin. Kelvin Holt was 31 years old and had been close to Aunt Sandra's family for years, not by blood, but by proximity. He had grown up down the street from Sandra's oldest son, Devon, and the two had been best friends since middle school. Over time, Kelvin had become a fixture in the family. He showed up for cookouts, for holidays, for Sunday dinners. He helped with yard work when nobody asked. He was the kind of person that a family folds in without even making a decision about it. And because he had been around for so long, because nobody questioned his presence, because familiarity had slowly become the same thing as trust, Kelvin was treated as family. That was the first thing Liliana accepted when she arrived. Kelvin was family. Kelvin was safe. Looking back, she would spend a long time thinking about how casually that assumption was made. The first day passed beautifully. Aunt Sandra made her famous peach cobbler. Devin's kids ran through the house screaming. Liliana stayed up past midnight talking with her aunt about everything, about work, about life, about what Liliana wanted for her future. It felt exactly like what it was supposed to feel like, and she went to bed that first night feeling genuinely happy. It was the second day when something began to shift, not dramatically, not in a way that any single person would have pointed to when called alarming, but in a way that, when Liliana would later describe it, made her stomach tighten just to remember.
Kelvin was always around. That was the first thing she noticed. Wherever she was in the house, he seemed to appear. If she was in the kitchen pouring a glass of water, he was suddenly there at the counter. If she sat on the back porch in the evening to get some air, he would pull up a chair. At first, she told herself it was nothing. He was friendly. He was talkative. Maybe he was just a social person. But then came the questions, personal questions. What did she do for fun back home? Was she seeing anyone? Had she ever thought about moving closer to Savannah? The questions themselves were not extraordinary, but the way he asked them was, leaning in a little too close, holding eye contact a beat too long, smiling like he knew something she didn't.
Then there was the touching. Nothing that you could point to in isolation and call inappropriate. A hand on her shoulder when he passed her in the hallway, a brush of his arm against hers when they were both reaching for something at the dinner table. But it added up. All of it added up. And Liliana kept quiet about it because she didn't want to cause a scene. She didn't want to seem dramatic. This was family, she told herself, or close enough to family. She didn't want to make Aunt Sandra uncomfortable. She didn't want to ruin the visit. So she laughed at his jokes and moved away slightly when he got too close and told herself it was nothing. That was the second assumption that would haunt her, the one where she decided that keeping the peace mattered more than listening to the feeling growing quietly in her chest. Then one night, everyone went to bed earlier than usual.
It was the third night. Aunt Sandra had been complaining of a headache since dinner, and by 9 o'clock, she had retreated to her bedroom. Devin and his wife had taken the kids out to her parents' house for the night. The other cousin, who had been staying in the house, had left earlier that afternoon to drive back to Atlanta. The house, which had been full and loud and safe-feeling for 2 days, was suddenly very quiet, and Kelvin was still there. Liliana had been in the kitchen cleaning up the last of the dinner dishes when she heard the TV turn off in the living room. She assumed Devin's wife had gone to bed. She assumed she would hear the creak of someone climbing the stairs. Instead, she heard footsteps moving toward the kitchen. She kept her hands on the dishes. She kept her eyes on the sink. And she told herself that whatever she was feeling, that cold, creeping awareness, was just her imagination. It wasn't.
He came in and stood too close. He started talking, low and slow, the way people talk when they want a conversation to feel private. He positioned himself between her and the kitchen doorway. And somewhere in the next few minutes, Liliana understood, the way you understand things that you don't have words for yet, that she was completely alone with him, that the rest of the house was asleep, that no one was coming. That moment changed everything. We will not describe what happened next in detail. What happened next is something that Liliana would carry with her for years. What happened next left marks that do not show on the outside. What we will tell you is that Liliana did not go back to sleep that night. She sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room with the door locked and the lamp on and her phone in her hands, shaking, trying to understand what her own life had just become. If you're still watching right now, comment the word "stay aware" in the comments section below. Stories like this are painful, they are uncomfortable, but they need to be told because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear this. Don't go anywhere. The next morning, Kelvin came downstairs and made himself a cup of coffee. He sat at the kitchen table and scrolled through his phone like nothing had happened, like the night before had simply not occurred. He said good morning to Aunt Sandra.
He laughed at something on his screen, he ate a bowl of cereal and rinsed his bowl in the same sink where Liliana had been standing just hours before. And the ease of it, the complete, untroubled ease with which he moved through that morning, made something inside Liliana go cold in a way she had never felt before.
She came downstairs because she didn't know what else to do. She couldn't leave without her car keys, which were in the kitchen. She couldn't call anyone without risking being overheard. So she came downstairs and she moved through that kitchen and she tried to make her face look normal while everything inside her was screaming. And then Kelvin looked up from his phone and smiled at her. Not a nervous smile, not a guilty smile, just a regular, easy smile, like they had a secret, like she had no choice but to keep it. That look, that one small look, told her everything she needed to know about what kind of man he was. He wasn't afraid. He didn't think he had done anything worth fearing consequences for. And that realization was, in some ways, more terrifying than the night before.
Later that morning, when Aunt Sandra stepped outside to water her garden, Kelvin walked past Liliana in the hallway and said very quietly, without looking at her, "We're good, right?" 3 words, casual, conversational, like he was checking in about a misunderstanding over something trivial, like the weight of what had happened between them was something she could simply agree to release. And Liliana didn't say anything. She pressed herself against the wall and let him pass, and stared at the floor until she heard the back door open and close. Then she went to the guest room and she called her best friend, Tamika, back in Charlotte. And for the first time since it happened, she said the words out loud. Her voice broke twice. She had to stop and start again, but she said them. Tamika told her to come home immediately, to pack her bag and walk out of that house right now. And Liliana wanted to. She wanted that more than she had ever wanted anything. But she thought about Aunt Sandra. She thought about how Sandra would feel. She thought about Devin, who had known Kelvin for 20 years. She thought about the family dinner that was planned for that evening. She thought about what happened when women said things like this out loud to rooms full of people who loved the person they were accusing. So she stayed. She stayed through the dinner. She smiled when she was supposed to smile. She nodded when people talked to her. And she counted the hours until morning, when she could finally get in her car and drive.
Liliana drove home on a Sunday morning. She remembered the sky being a particular shade of gray, not stormy, just heavy, like the weather couldn't quite decide what it wanted to do. She stopped once at a gas station somewhere in South Carolina, sat in her car in the parking lot for 11 minutes, and then got back on the highway. She didn't cry until she crossed the North Carolina state line, and once she started, she couldn't stop for a very long time. She told Tamika everything, in full, the moment she arrived home. Tamika sat with her for hours. She didn't minimize it. She didn't ask the questions that people sometimes ask, the ones that are disguised as concern, but are really doubt. She just listened. And when Liliana was done talking, Tamika said, "You have to tell your mother." Liliana already knew that. She had known since she was sitting on the edge of that bed with a lamp on. She had just been trying to find the courage. She called her mother, Patricia, the following Tuesday. She rehearsed what she was going to say 4 times before she dialed, and when her mother answered, Liliana started from the beginning. The questions, the proximity, the third night, the morning after, all of it. There was a long silence when she finished, and then her mother said, "Oh, baby," and started to cry. Patricia believed her daughter without hesitation. That was not nothing. For a lot of survivors, the first person they tell is the first person who fails them. Patricia did not fail her daughter. She told Liliana she loved her and that none of this was her fault and that they were going to figure out what to do next, together. What came next was harder. Patricia called her sister Sandra 2 days later, and that conversation, which Liliana was not on the phone for but heard about afterward, did not go the way Patricia had hoped. Sandra's first response was disbelief, not angry disbelief, just quiet, stunned, reluctant disbelief. Kelvin had been in their lives for 15 years.
He was Devon's best friend. He was, in Sandra's mind, practically a member of the family. The idea that he had done this in her house to her niece was something that Sandra's mind could not immediately hold. "Are you sure she's not confused?" Sandra asked. "Are you sure she didn't misread something?" Patricia had to hang up the phone. She sat in her kitchen and put her face in her hands and cried for a different reason than she had been crying before.
Devon's response was worse. When Sandra told him, Devon called Patricia directly and said, and this is a direct account of what was said, that Kelvin would never do something like that Liliana must have misunderstood, that Kelvin was a good man and this was going to ruin his life if it got out. He asked Patricia to handle it quietly. Patricia did not handle it quietly. She told her daughter what Devon had said, and Liliana, who had been sitting on the edge of courage for 2 weeks, finally stepped all the way off it. She filed a police report.
Filing that report was one of the hardest things Liliana had ever done. She sat across from a female detective named Ortega at the police department in Charlotte and went through every detail again, every timeline, every specific thing she remembered, the smell of the kitchen that night, the way the lamp in the guest room buzzed faintly when she turned it on, Kelvin's face when he said, "We're good, right?" Detective Ortega wrote everything down and told Liliana she was doing the right thing. Liliana nodded and drove home and sat in her car in her apartment parking lot for a long time before she could go inside.
The investigation was opened. Kelvin was contacted. He denied everything. He told investigators that Liliana had made advances toward him and that he had rejected them, that the whole thing was a misunderstanding, that she had blown out of proportion. It was the oldest script in the world, and infuriatingly, it created exactly the kind of murkiness that makes these cases so difficult to prosecute. There were no witnesses. There was no physical evidence collected in time. It was his word against hers. And in cases like that, the legal system, as much as it tries, does not always deliver the outcome that justice deserves.
Kelvin was not convicted. The case did not move forward to trial due to insufficient evidence. That outcome broke something in Liliana that had been holding itself together by sheer will. She didn't sleep well for months. She started therapy in the spring, and she would tell her therapist that the hardest part wasn't the night it happened, it was every single morning after, when she had to wake up and remember that the world kept moving as if everything was normal, as if Kelvin was still going to cookouts, as if Devon was still defending him, as if Aunt Sandra was still making peach cobbler and acting like the fault lines in the family weren't real. The family split, as families do when truth arrives and not everyone is ready to receive it. Patricia cut off contact with Sandra entirely. 2 of Sandra's children reached out to Liliana privately and told her they believed her. 1 didn't. Kelvin was asked to stop coming around the house, not because Devon believed Liliana, but because Sandra couldn't bear the tension anymore. He complied. He moved on. That was the part that stayed with Liliana the longest, the ease with which he simply moved on. What Liliana could not have known then, and what she came to understand slowly through therapy and through time, is that the damage done in those 5 days was not just about one night. It was about the way trust becomes a kind of wound when the people and places you believed in turn out to be something different than what you thought. Research by organizations like RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, tells us that in the vast majority of sexual assault cases, the perpetrator is someone the victim already knows, someone already folded into the fabric of their life, someone they never thought to be afraid of. That is not an accident. That is how predatory behavior works. It finds the places where you are not looking.
Liliana Bowen is 26 years old now. She went back to school just like she planned. She is studying healthcare administration just like she said she would. She has a small apartment in Charlotte that she has decorated exactly the way she wants it. Plants on every windowsill, photographs of people who love her on the walls, a bookshelf she is slowly filling. She still talks to Tamika almost every day. She still talks to her mother. She still goes to therapy every other week, not because she is broken, but because healing is not a destination, it is a practice, and she has decided to practice it. She does not talk about what happened in that house to very many people, but she agreed to have her story told in a way that protects her name and her face, because she said something that stuck with the person she told it to. She said, "The only thing that kept me quiet for so long was the fear that no one would believe me, and I don't want that to be the reason someone else stays quiet. Even one person, I don't want that to be the reason." So let's talk about what she said, because it matters.
According to Rain, approximately 8 out of 10 sexual assault cases involve a perpetrator who is known to the victim. Family gatherings, holiday visits, homes that feel safe, these are not places where danger cannot enter. They are, in fact, the exact places where it is most likely to hide. Not because families are dangerous, but because trust creates blind spots. Because familiarity teaches us to dismiss the quiet feeling in our chest that is trying to tell us something. Because we are raised to be polite, to keep the peace, to not cause a scene. And predators, whether they consciously know it or not, depend on all of that. They depend on your politeness, your patience, your reluctance to ruin a good evening.
So here is what Liliana wants you to take away from her story. Trust that feeling. Whatever the social cost, whatever the awkwardness, whatever people might think, trust it, name it, and move towards safety. Even if safety means leaving a room, leaving a house, leaving a family gathering that everyone else thinks is going fine. Your instincts are not being dramatic. They are doing their job. Let them do it. And if someone you know comes to you with a story like this, I want you to think about Patricia. About what she did when her daughter called her on a Tuesday afternoon and told her something that was almost impossible to hear. She didn't ask if Liliana was sure. She didn't wonder aloud if there had been a misunderstanding. She said, "Oh, baby," and she stayed on the line. That is what believing someone looks like. It doesn't cost anything, and it is everything. I want to ask you something before you go, and I want you to sit with it for a moment. If you had been in Liliana's position, 5 hours from home, inside the house of someone you trusted, surrounded by people who knew the man who hurt you better than they knew you, would you have spoken up immediately? Or would you, like Liliana, have worried about the dinner, about the cobbler, about what your aunt would think? There is no wrong answer, because the truth is, most of us would have done exactly what she did. We would have stayed quiet, because that is what we have been taught to do. And that is the part of this story that I hope stays with you. The place she once called safe would never feel exactly the same again. But Liliana built herself a new one, slowly, deliberately, plant by plant on a windowsill, page by page on a bookshelf. She is still here. She is still fighting. And she wants you to know that if you are carrying something like this, if you are sitting with a secret that is heavier than you can hold alone, you do not have to carry it forever. Help exists. People exist who will believe you.
Drop the word awareness in the comments if you believe that silence protects abusers. Let's fill the comment section. And before you go, if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. We cover stories that matters, stories that don't always make the front page, but live in the lives of real people every single day. Thank you for watching. Thank you for coming. See you in the next one.